On this episode of Newt's World, Joe Biden made less than $200,000 a year for most of his life in public service. But as soon as he left office, he bought his second multi-million-dollar mansion. He shared a bookkeeper with Hunter Biden and a law firm with several Biden family members that managed their money. Hunter, who hasn't had a real job in decades, has raked in tens of millions of dollars. Joe Biden met many of the foreigners writing the checks, but still maintains all of these situations are nothing to be concerned about. In his new book, All the President's Money, Investigating the Secret Foreign Schemes that Made the Biden Family Rich, Congressman James Comer takes readers on a captivating journey through the murky world of the Biden family's business dealings. This explosive expose delves deep into allegations of corruption, influence peddling, and money laundering, and asks the question, was this an abuse of power? Here to talk about his new book, I'm really pleased to welcome my good friend and guest, Congressman James Comer, Chairman of the House Oversight Committee. He represents the 1st Congressional District of the great state of Kentucky, and he has been doing a great job leading the committee. James, welcome, and thank you for joining me again on Newt's World.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's my honor.
Can we start with the whole notion that in the years that Biden was in the Senate, the annual salary for senators was $174,000 a year. When he became vice president under Barack Obama, he made $223,500 a year. Of course, they also gave him a house. The money he did make was when he was out of office, writing books and giving speeches. All the president's money is a deep investigation which you led into the financial activities of the Biden family. Can you walk us through some of the most shocking findings you uncovered during your investigation?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So the book is essentially a forensic audit of how the Bidens operated, especially during the last 2 years of the Obama-Biden administration. That's where a significant amount of money transacted. And what would happen is the vice president would meet with these people in different countries, and then days later, literally days later, millions of dollars would start transferring into a series of bank accounts. The bank accounts were all under different LLCs. Usually the initial bank account was in partnership with what we would call an associate. I believe that was because if something went bad, then they would blame it on the associate. And that happened several times with people like Jason Galanis and Devin Archer and people like that. They got in trouble and Hunter Biden never did. But then the money would then be laundered through various other LLCs and then end up in incremental payments in different Biden family bank accounts. We learned that most of this money happened while Joe Biden was vice president. One of the myths when we started the investigation was that no money ever transacted while Joe Biden was vice president. And I actually believe that. But what we found when I subpoenaed the bank records was almost all of the money, tens of millions of dollars, in fact, were transferred while Joe Biden was vice president. And then the China money started coming in just a few weeks after Joe Biden left the vice presidency. And that was after Hunter left the infamous WhatsApp message saying, "My father's sitting beside me. We expect you to fulfill your commitments that were made while my father was vice president." So the shocking thing about the book is that the banks knew about this and the banks did everything right. There were 6 different banks that filed 170 suspicious activity reports, which are reports to the Treasury Cabinet that we believe their client is committing some type of financial crime, from money laundering to bribery to things like that. The last thing we found that there were 4 different government agencies that had ongoing investigations of the Biden family for financial crimes. And those agencies were the IRS, the FBI, the Department of Justice in multiple jurisdictions, and the Securities and Exchange Commission. And in each instance, they were told to stand down by what I refer to as a deep state bureaucrat.
I'm curious, when you look at all this activity, do you really think it's plausible that Biden didn't know the financial arrangements Hunter Biden had with all these foreign businesses? I mean, do you just think this money happened to fortunately show up?
No, I think Joe Biden lied I know he lied when he said he had never met any of these people. Why wouldn't he say, I have met with them, I meet with everybody that Hunter's friends with, or whatever? He said, under no circumstances has Joe Biden ever met with Hunter Biden. That was a lie. He met with all of them. We met with all of them. And then he said there was a wall between his personal finances and Hunter's. And what we found in the investigation was that Joe Biden's bookkeeper was also Hunter's, and Joe Biden never paid his bookkeeper a penny. So somebody was paying that bookkeeper. I would argue it was Hunter through the influence peddling schemes. And then they shared the same law firm. So you don't have a wall between your businesses when you share the same house, you share the same CPA firm, and you share the same law firm.
When you look at all that, isn't it probable that in the debate with Trump in 2020, he just plain lied?
He did lie. And I think this is going to be remembered in history as one of the biggest acts of election interference by the federal government. And I say that because when the laptop was discovered, when it became public, the intelligence community immediately went not just and signed that letter, the infamous letter with 51 former intelligence officials saying that it was Russian disinformation. We learned through our investigation, they went further. They went to Twitter, they went to Facebook, and they told them all to be ready. This story's fixing to break by the New York Post, and it sure sounds a lot like the Russian disinformation. When in fact, when they were doing that, they had possession of that laptop for over 6 months. So the intelligence community knowingly lied to the American people when they had those intelligence officials sign that letter. And then they went further to censor the story right before the election so that the American voters would never know the truth of the financial crimes that the Bidens committed.
I thought it was astonishing. And of course, Anthony Blinken, who became Secretary of State, was the guy who organized the intelligence community letter, which was a total lie. I mean, I knew a bunch of these guys. The idea that they would sign up to lie to the American people, I found shocking. And I think it did serious damage to the intelligence community's reputation with the American people. Now, in your book, one of the things you mention is the Biden brand. I mean, how would you define the Biden brand, and how do you think Hunter and the rest of the family use that brand?
Devin Archer was the first person to term the coin Biden brand, and then later 2 other former what we call associates, Tony Bobulinski and Jason Galanis, also testified under oath that they sold the Biden brand. What that was a fancy word meaning we're selling access to Joe. And anyone that was in business with Hunter knew that it really wasn't a business. It was an influence peddling scheme. And what they were peddling was access to Joe. And it wasn't like they were peddling to special interests, Mr. Speaker. They were peddling to our adversaries around the world. In the book, it details exactly who these people were that wired the $1 million plus wires to the Bidens. And what I would say during the investigation, these were bad people from bad countries wiring significant amounts of money to the Biden family that they then laundered through a series of shell companies and then distributed to 10 different Biden family members through incremental payments.
When you mention 10 different Biden family members, all the attention gets paid to Hunter, but isn't it a fact that several other members of the family were probably equally guilty?
I would say that some of the Biden family members may not have had criminal liability, but they benefited from the financial schemes. But certainly the top 3, and that would be Hunter Biden, Joe Biden, and Jim Biden, were actively engaged in the influence peddling schemes. The difference in Jim Biden and Hunter Biden is that Jim didn't leave a laptop lying around. So you don't know as much about Jim, and there was never as much press about Jim, only because he didn't leave an incriminating laptop lying around. But I would argue from looking at the financial accounts and records of Jim Biden that he's a lot sloppier and more careless than Hunter Biden. I said in the book, Hunter was more intelligent than a lot of the conservative media gave him credit for. He had the misfortune of getting on drugs, and of course, drugs mess with you. But these financial schemes were very sophisticated. And what I put in the book that a lot of people didn't realize, the very first real job Hunter Biden had right out of law school was he was a bank fraud investigator for a credit card company in Delaware. So I would argue that he learned how to defraud from being a financial fraud investigator. And these schemes, the banks would detail it, the Irish whistleblowers would detail it, that they were very sophisticated. I mean, this wasn't, some crackhead on the street hiding some dime bag dope money. This was a very sophisticated scheme that was a hard nut for the IRS to crack, but we learned from the Irish whistleblowers they finally figured it out. And when they did, that's when Leslie Wolf at the Department of Justice, the deep state bureaucrat, said, stand down. You can't talk to any of the Biden family.
Compare what happens to the Bidens with Senator Menendez, who doesn't have the President of the United States protecting him. The relative difference, or Representative William Jefferson from Louisiana, who had money in his freezer.
I cite those two examples in the book. They did the exact same thing the Bidens did, only on a much smaller scale. They go to prison, and Hunter Biden, gets off scot-free, as well as Joe Biden and Jim Biden. It's an injustice, and it shows that there was truly a two-tier system of justice.
Why did the media find it so hard to report accurately on these things?
I believe with all my heart it was because they hated Donald Trump. I do not think the media had any love affair of Joe Biden like they did Barack Obama or Bill Clinton during the Clinton presidency. I believe it was the sheer hatred of Donald Trump and the sheer fear that Donald Trump would, in the beginning, remain president and then eventually make his return to the presidency. I think that their whole existence was threatened by Donald Trump. And when I say they, I'm talking about the media, the liberal media, the deep state. They did not want a guy like Donald Trump that disputed him and that had a following that discredited him. I mean, I think one of the greatest things for conservatives that Donald Trump has done is he has discredited the liberal media. And Mr. Speaker, you fought the media your entire life, and you know that it's tough. And I fought them and it was tough. But Donald Trump's the one guy that has, I think he has destroyed the media, and it's just a matter of time before there's not much left.
Did you see that with the collapse of CNN and the collapse of MSNBC and the downsizing at the Washington Post? I mean, if you looked at the media of 20 years ago and you look at them now, Trump has really done an amazing job of getting the American people to understand how dishonest they have been. In your investigation, there were 150 suspicious activity reports, which in the classic Washington model are called SARS, S-A-R, for Suspicious Activity Report, that were linked to the Biden family. Can you explain what a suspicious activity report is and why it matters?
Yes, I can. And I knew about the 150 suspicious activity reports from the Grassley and Johnson report. Somehow they found out that there were 150 suspicious activity reports. And I knew what a suspicious activity report was because I was a director of a bank and my family was in the banking business in South Central Kentucky. So a suspicious activity report is a bank violation. It's the biggest bank violation a bank issues. They don't issue them very often. And the media would try to act like it was a common thing. It's not a common thing. I was a director of a bank in Kentucky, which was, one of the top 10 Kentucky domiciled banks. Over a 10-year period, I think we issued 2 suspicious activity reports. And what they are is the bank notifying the federal government that they believe their client has committed a financial crime. I knew, number one, if you've got 150 of those, something's wrong, because I've never heard of anyone getting more than 1 or maybe 2. And number 2, I knew no bank would issue one on the son of a vice president of the United States unless they were darn sure that a violation be committed. Because when you file one of those, the bank examiners come into the bank. And the last thing a bank wants to see are bank examiners knocking on their front door. So they filed these, and they filed them with Treasury. But because of bank privacy laws, the only way you can access them is to go into Treasury with a subpoena. I did that, finally got in there with Janet Yellen. And what we found was there was actually 170 suspicious activity reports, which I think you can ask any banker in America, do you know anyone that had more than 10 suspicious activity reports? And they would say no. This is 170 from 6 different banks. It wasn't the same bank. And these weren't little banks like the bank I was a director of. This was J.P. Morgan, Wells Fargo, Cathay Bank. I mean, these are some of the biggest banks in the world. And they filed suspicious activity reports saying things like money laundering, like potential bribery, like receiving money from shell companies that they believe are state-owned entities. A state-owned entity is bank speak for foreign country. They thought the Chinese money wasn't from a real company in China. They thought it was from the Chinese government. So what Tony Bobulinski would later testify under oath, which I think was the biggest story that never really got printed about the investigation, was that there was no real company in China. It was the Chinese government paying the Bidens a bribe just so they could have influence over them.
I noticed that you say that the Bidens received $8 million in basically an intelligence operation. Isn't that astonishing that you could have somebody sitting in the White House whose family had gotten $8 million from the Chinese communists?
Yes, and Christopher Wray just gave an outgoing interview with 60 Minutes, and they asked him what the biggest threat to the United States of America was, and he said China. Well, why didn't he do anything when he knew that Joe Biden family, his son, who was living in his house with him, where the classified documents were stored, received $8 million from the Chinese government? And according to the IRS whistleblowers, Mr. Speaker, they never paid a penny of taxes on it.
Did you find yourself at times just being totally surprised as your team came in and told you the latest things?
I was shocked that someone could pull this off, but I was shocked more than anything how bad the media was. And we would report something, and it wasn't like we got it on Twitter. We would have their bank records. We had the actual email, and the media would immediately click their heels and say, no evidence. This deposition produced nothing. They would report on the depositions before we even swore the witnesses in. CNN had a story up on how big a failure the transcribed interview with Eric Sherwin was, who was the bookkeeper, before we even swore him in. It's unbelievable how dishonest the media was about what I think is the biggest public corruption scandal in my lifetime.
Certainly, you'd have to consider this the biggest scandal involving the White House. What makes it so terrible is it's clear that Hunter was a drug addict and probably an alcoholic. But here you have the Vice President of the United States, former U.S. Senator, and then President, and he is in a series of relations, not just China, the mayor's wife in Moscow, it is Ukraine, I think it's Kazakhstan. I mean, there are a lot of places where people are finding it useful to give money to the Bidens.
Yeah, it was Romania, China, Russia, Ukraine, and Kazakhstan. With the exception of China, not normal countries where there's a lot of commerce between the United States and anyone else. The amazing thing was that the media would say, oh, the Bidens were in business like the Trumps. Well, the Trumps actually own real businesses, and no one could ever say what the Biden business was. If anything, you would argue they were lobbying, which to lobby, you have to register as a foreign agent if you're lobbying for a foreign country or a foreign entity, and they never registered as foreign agents. Well, people get put in jail all the time for not registering as foreign agents. In fact, two of the people that also got money from China for the same thing, they went to jail for violating the Foreign Agents Registration Act. But Hunter Biden and Joe Biden and Jim Biden, they never went to jail. They were never even prosecuted over that.
I thought the independent counsel's argument for not trying the president, that he thought he was too old and his ability to function was too limited, that his cognitive decline was too great. I thought that was absolutely weird. And it's pretty clear that the special counsel was not in any way pro-Biden. I've never quite understood how he managed to reach that decision. Now that you've looked at all this, and we live in a modern world where we have real-time information. And by the way, I remember, I think one of the pictures you had was Vice President Biden meeting with a whole series of foreign business leaders at Cafe Milano. I mean, it was blatantly obvious. I wish the Trump campaign had that picture in 2020 because it would have blown out of the water the entire Biden allegation of innocence. But when you look at all this, beyond going after the Biden family, which I think is legitimate and we should get to the bottom of it, given what you've learned, what actions do you think Congress should take to ensure greater transparency and accountability to the dealings of elected officials and their families?
Well, I had legislation that I tried to pass last year, and the Democrats weren't interested in it. They weren't interested in the beginning because they thought Joe Biden was going to get reelected. After the debate, they became interested in it until Kamala Harris got put on the ticket. Then they became uninterested in it again, all the way to the end of the Congress. But it's the Presidential Ethics Reform Act, and it significantly increases the disclosure requirements so you can have greater transparency in a president's income and their immediate family's income, because you can hide money. If your son lives with you in the house, which I would argue that Hunter Biden spent more nights in the White House than he spent in hotels or in that condo in California, you need to have disclosure of your immediate family members. That's what this bill would do, and I hope to pass it. Obviously, it won't be able to take effect till the next administration, but I tried to get it passed to where it would impact this incoming administration. But again, the Democrats didn't want to do it because they thought Harris was going to be president, and the Democrats are only interested in ethics when it's a Republican administration.
Do you think that we have a real long-term reporting problem? I mean, it's clear that the Bidens were just plain willing to lie. So does it have to come through the banks or through the financial institutions? How do you enforce it if you're dealing with a politician who doesn't mind lying?
There's supposed to be checks and balances, and there were in this case. The IRS knew what they were doing. The FBI knew what they were doing. The CIA knew what they were doing. Treasury knew what they were doing. The banks did everything right. The banks reported correctly the crimes. But our government agencies did nothing. They intentionally told the IRS whistleblowers to stand down. And I think that there are checks and balances to where this would get caught. And then, another check and balance unofficially is supposed to be the mainstream media. But this media had absolutely no curiosity with respect to the Bidens. They were very curious about Trump and Jared Kushner and their deal. They had no curiosity with respect to the Bidens. So there are checks and balances in place. And if anyone thinks, well, somehow they got away with it, nobody caught them, well, they did catch them. Again, the 4 different government agencies were investigating, but they were told to stand down. I think just cleaning house at those agencies with Kash Patel, with John Radcliffe, with Billy Long at the IRS, with the new Securities and Exchange Director, I think that's a first step. And hopefully this disrupted media and whatever emerges in the new age of media with respect to Twitter and podcasts and things like that, hopefully we can catch that. But I think ethics laws, because there's no definition of influence peddling. And that's what my legislation defined influence peddling. What is influence peddling? And this is illegal because right now, unfortunately, influence peddling is not illegal. And I don't think you could limit like what Trump does. I don't think it's right to say, well, you shouldn't have any businesses or you should divest all your assets. Because I'm a Republican and I want a business guy in office. I think we've got to have a business guy to manage the money better and manage the federal workforce better. So I welcome business people in office, but you just need to be transparent. And I think Trump's done that. He brags about his businesses. He brags about his courses in other countries. And people like that. They want a business guy. So I don't think it's a matter of saying you can't be in business or owning business. It's just be transparent about it and disclose it.
Coming up on Monday is the inauguration. What are your feelings? Are you looking forward to it?
I am looking forward to it. We've tried to provide oversight on the Oversight Committee, but this Biden administration will not turn over any documents. We had a hearing about the federal workforce. As you know, a significant percentage of the federal workforce in Washington, D.C. is working from home because of COVID. They're not coming to work. They're not doing their jobs. And we never could get specific numbers of how many employees are actually showing up to work. I think with the new Trump administration, we'll be able to get information and we'll be able to provide better oversight for the taxpayer. So we needed new blood in Washington, and I think we're going to get that on Monday.
You and I think, are in agreement, but explain why you think having one big, beautiful bill is much better than trying to divide it into two bills?
Well, I think that it's very difficult to govern, especially in the House of Representatives. When Stefanik and Mike Waltz resign on January 20th to go into the Trump administration, we're not going to have but 217 to 215 minority ratio. So we can't lose a vote. If it's 216 to 216, the bill fails. I think having one bill, get it all done. Don't make it linger into the fall. Get it done. If it's one bill, there'll be a greater sense of urgency by Congress to get it passed. I think one bill is the most efficient. One bill is the easiest to pass, which you have to think about stuff like that. You have to think you have to get to 218 in the House or 217, whatever the number is at the time. And then you have to get to 51 in the Senate. So I think this is the best way. And it's what I strongly endorse.
Having been Speaker and having once passed 2 reconciliations in 1 year, we need this bill early. We need for it to be big. We need to really re-energize the economy, make life more affordable, increase take-home pay, and create jobs. And if we'll do it right, we could really have a very, very good election next year by proving that we can govern. You know, James, I've really enjoyed working with you and your team. You've been very generous in letting me come over and learn from you and learn from your team. I want to thank you for joining me. Your new book, All the President's Money, Investigating the Secret Foreign Schemes That Made the Biden Family Rich, is available now on Amazon and in bookstores everywhere. We're going to feature a link to buy it on our show page, and I really appreciate you taking the time. I know how busy you are. And
thank you so much. I'm a big fan, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you to my guest, Chairman James Comer. You can get a link to buy his new book, All the President's Money, on our show page at newtsworld.com. Newt's World is produced by Gingrich 360 and iHeartMedia. Our executive producer is Garnsey Sloan. Our researcher is Rachel Peterson. The artwork for the show was created by Steve Penley. Special thanks to the team at Gingrich 360. If you've been enjoying Newt's World, I hope you'll go to Apple Podcast and both rate us with 5 stars and give us a review so others can learn what it's all about. Right now, listeners of Newt's World can sign up for my 3 free weekly columns at gingrich360.com/newsletter. I'm Newt Gingrich. This is Newt's World.